pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
So welcome to the Aviatrix Writers Room. I'm continuing my conversation with Melody Foreman, and we're going to talk a little bit more about her writing. We talked quite a lot about it in the first portion of the interview, so you can listen to that part, and we'll just kind of fill in some blanks from there. So you talked a little bit about this relationship with Mary, about how you had to schedule with her assistant to get times with her, and how maybe sometimes she wasn't always ready to talk with you. So talk to me a little bit, you talked about also the other people around you who helped you, but just a little bit more about doing this kind of research where you're working with an individual to write their biography, but you're trying to fill in the spaces around it with context.
I think that was essential, that I did do the research, because then that made me confident to feel relaxed with her. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's
because
not so intimidating.
Because if I'd gone in, I mean, when I trained as a baby reporter, you were plonked in situations and you didn't know anything. You were there to just get the facts, and that was all. You asked a straight question, you got the facts. You didn't think, you didn't analyze it. So working just with the one person, I wanted to make sure I knew as much as I could. So that saved her the time to have to explain. And because of her vast age, I was very aware that she wouldn't want to go through the whole history of aviation with me, which she probably knew very well. So I wanted to jump those pages, if you like, because I'd read about the First World War and how the fighter aircraft, the idea for the fighter aircraft, sort of came into existence. And I learned something about, the advances in aviation, and I researched the area she was born, so what was going on in aviation when she was born, and kind of this idea that there was castor oil fumes in the air and they got into her bloodstream, and there she became a pilot. So I wanted to kind of make sure she knew I wasn't just some babbling idiot who was just saying, what's it like to fly a Spitfire? Because she'd been bored with these questions probably a lot, so I wanted to obviously offer her some anecdotes as well from what I'd learned from other pilots, so she felt relaxed enough with me to warm up and answer my questions. And I always knew if she didn't want to answer them, because she'd laugh. She just used to be very sort of like sweet, and she'd just laugh in the way that meant, oh, you don't want to know about that. And I go, what I do. And that was, I remember, the only kind of tricky time was obviously during the war. They were all instructed, if you make friends, it could be difficult because they might not come back the next day. I mean, I've heard this from some of the male pilots, including Tom Neal, that you would difficult if you made any friends, because you might wake up and they wouldn't be in the bunk bed next door the next morning. They might not come back from a raid and this sort of thing. And I think that idea where you had to be prepared for the worst was infiltrated through to the ATA, and I think that's why she was so sensitive about Dora Lang. Didn't really want to talk about it at all, and I said, but there's research that it was a fact, and this is what happened, and people saw this mosquito dive into the ground the wrong way. And so she said, oh, you knew it was a mosquito then, and then it sort of opened up this idea that perhaps she would talk a little more about it. And then she said, oh, the parents, she said her mother came and I got something out of the locker. Her mother gave me something of Dora's out of the locker, which I believe was a handkerchief or something. But Mary then went off and she got out of the cupboard this autograph book that Dora had signed. So it was really sweet. And I can't remember the message now, but I think it referred to the time when Dora came in to land in one Spitfire on the runway, and Mary came in the other side, and their wings were like 2 inches apart.
Yes, I remembered reading that, and how they intentionally landed on the side of the runway rather on the center line.
Yeah.
And without that, they might not have been alive after that. Yeah.
Yeah, but with good old humor, they just sort of, almost sort of shrugged it off. But I think possibly she did look back on her life and possibly realize how scary it possibly was, because she'd had 1 or 2 encounters, and I don't think she ever really told me how badly she'd been injured when the Fairchild Argus, when the engine cut out over Brockenhurst, Hampshire, because she always said, oh, the first thing I worried about was landing in a field of cows, because I was scared of the cows, more scared of the cows than the engine, you know, than what was going to happen when the engine hit the ground, the aircraft hit the ground. So she was, I wouldn't have said she was in denial, but it was something that she obviously trained herself to hide and bury, and so I did what I'm trying to say is I did my best to be as sensitive as I could around her, but gently remind her that there was a big wide world of very interested people out there who'd like to actually hear what she hid, or what she went through when things weren't going so brilliantly, you know, for her, when there were those incidences of people being there 1 minute and not the next. I think that was the recipe, and it always, as I get older in life, it always sort of has been, really, is to start to talk to people. And then, I mean, that's the wonderful thing of, you know, when I'm at the bookshop, people tell me all sorts of things when they're looking for books, and so many people, you know, now, because I've, you know, talking about a Spitfire, bought a Spitfire girl, especially, they say, oh, you know, my father flew bombers, or, you know, my mother was in the ATS, and oh, we saw Mary Ellis on the TV. And so I talk about it quite a lot, really, when I'm, you know, when I'm not meant to be. I'm meant to be talking about other fiction and other books in the shop, but actually I can't not listen to people tell me about their own families, really. So it's quite a good place to be, because I'm not in a newsroom anymore. I actually get the information now off the ground that's not been all filtered through. So all of that research, I think, has just always helps if I want to talk to people and find out what I can, but not do it in a kind of a scurrilous way, because of late I've noticed there's a lot of male TV presenters. I don't know about authors as much, but whenever they've interviewed veterans, they sort of hammer questions at them like machine gun fire, and I can really feel these, you know, older generation just sort of reeling back, because it's too much. It's just too much. Oh, quick, I'm on a deadline. And then they think, well, if you're not going to actually listen or kind of appreciate what I've got to tell you, it's going to put their backs up, and then the whole interview is done in this sort of horrible, quick, ramshackle way. And I hate that. Between us, Mary, you know, she's been interviewed by 1 or 2 of them, and I can hear and feel the tension in her voice. I can tell she's immediately annoyed because they snap their fingers. They expect her to perform. So then I can tell when she's going to I could tell always when she was going to shut down, because all they wanted to talk about was the thrills and spills of flying, you know, sort of one of the fastest aircraft, you know, that we had during the war.
Yeah.
But she didn't really know what else she could say, apart from, I thoroughly loved it and I felt it was part of me. I mean, so she repeated that story quite a lot. The same as the joke. She always told me, and it always raises a laugh, and I still tell it now, when she flew a Wellington bomber into Brooklands airfield, which is a very strange airfield because it's like in a big circle, because it used to be a racing track. And she landed this, she took off, from Brooklands, and she was going to deliver this aircraft to a squadron, RAF squadron. I'll quickly tell you this story, which you probably know. And it was a bit of a hairy flight, because she said in this Wellington, the hatch kept opening and shutting, so she was putting on autopilot and shutting it and then getting back into the cockpit. And when she finally landed, the RAF ground crew ran over to the aircraft, and she climbed down the ladder from the cockpit, and they said to her very famously, "Where's the pilot?" And she said, "I am the pilot." And they didn't believe her, of course. And then she always said to me, you must say it correctly, I am the pilot. Not I'm the pilot, I am the pilot. And then there was this, what, a little girl like you with blonde fluffy curls and your hair's flying this aircraft. And she said she always told the story, they went up the ladder and ransacked the aircraft thinking there was a crew, male crew in there. She said it was about half an hour before they actually believed that she'd flown the aircraft. So that story always added some brevity to the occasion, even though it was terribly sort of sexist of them not to believe that she'd landed this bomb on this airfield. But they kind of got used to it, really. It was an extraordinary story. So once she got remembering and looking at photographs, we used to get the photographs out. She used to quite like that. And I'd say, oh, who's this and who's that? And she used to let me take photographs of the photographs. So I didn't want to worry her and not take the photographs away. So she was very happy about that, and she let me take some photographs of the logbook, etc. And quite understandably, she didn't want to let that go. Of course, when I would be terrified of taking it away anyway from her house. So, but she talked about all sorts of other things. Her garden, she's a massive fan of gardening.
Well, one of the things that you said about sort of the source materials, her own personal things that she collected, it goes back to a couple of other interviews that I've done with biographers. Claire Mully was one of those. Sarah Byrne Rickman is another who wrote extensively about the women's Air Force service pilots in the WAFs in the US. Just talking about this, all of these treasures that are hidden in people's homes. And I think it was Claire who said, if you're somebody doing this kind of research, never take the materials, always make a copy, take a picture, and then advise those people not to give them away, I mean, unless obviously there's an archive or something that you can donate to them. But yeah, it's a really interesting point. And then just all of the things that you said about the ways in which you established your trust with Mary, with this, each person is going to have different motivations or a different personality in terms of a writer trying to establish a relationship with someone you're co-authoring with or whatever. I know I'm exploring the possibility of doing that. And so just establishing that sense of trust, it sounds like that you were able to do that successfully, and obviously you were successful in publishing the book. I was wondering, so you approached Mary about writing her story.
Yeah.
Can you talk about sort of the business end of things? How did you market, or how did you sell this book to a publisher? Did you write a proposal first, or did you have the whole book written? What did that process look like?
Well, I was approached by Frontline Pen and Sword, who were part of Pen and Sword military history publishers. And I think word got out via someone I knew at one of the museums that I was writing this biography of Mary, and the person at the time, I think, worked for a military history publication, and then he was friends with the publisher that I deal with. And then this guy called me and said, oh, I understand you're writing about, Mary Wilkins Ellis. I said, oh yeah, I am. Who told you? So it was a male chit chat thing. And then I didn't want to be rushed into it, really. I didn't want to be rushed into choosing a publisher, but this guy was quite persuasive, and so eventually I agreed, and it went from there, really. Well, you probably detect I'm being a little bit sort of, a bit kind of coy about it, but yeah, because I've got an interesting relationship with them at the moment. But in regards to when it came to Mary's book, there was quite a lot of edits I had to check and make sure that the person I was working with as an editor understood, and they didn't tinker too much with words that were aviation related that they hadn't realized was spelt like that in a certain way. So that's how Mary's book came to be published, that I was approached. And because I was quite new to book publishing then, I probably should have held out for more recompense than I get at the moment. However, there was a part of me that always felt, sort of, it's strange actually. It's kind of unsettling, isn't it, to discuss finance when it's someone's life, someone who's been through what they've been through, etc., etc. But these publishers, so just to warn you, Liz, if you're going to go down that road, just be really watchful who you chat to and make sure they're kind of on board with everything that you feel you'll do for it as well. So I mean, I've done it, it was a passion project for me, because I so believed in what she'd achieved, and women in flight, and it's so poetic. The whole idea of flight is just poetry for me, really. So I thought, well, we go for it. So I signed Frontline, and the book came out, and it came out in hardback first of all, as you know, and there were a couple of annoying errors in it which I had to get changed. And then because it had done fairly well, they decided to go quite rarely to produce it as a paperback. And so that's why we're lucky to have a paperback, because the original, the hardback, I think was £25, and then the paperback was £14.99, and it's been selling ever since. And I very naughtily have it on sale still in my shop, even though it's one of those titles that I think will always sell, because people still find it extraordinary that women flew during the war. It's still a discovery for them. So that's how that came about with Frontline. And then of course they then published the Wreck Hunter, because I signed a contract to write another 3 once I a few years ago now. I was very ill. I was in hospital, and I came out of hospital, and Martin swept in. This was after Spitfire Girl had been published, and he swept in. He said, "Oh, will you write these ones?" And he said, "Have you got any ideas?" And I said, "Well, I'm quite interested in movie stars who showed the grit behind the glamour, and they took part in the war, etc." And he goes, "Oh, right, I'll sign you up for that one then. I'll sign you up for this one then. I'll sign you up for that one then." And then before I knew it, there was these 3 contracts, and they had these books somewhere. And then of course I had to go and earn some money. And when I was a freelance, when I was full-time freelance, it wasn't the writing of the pieces. It was all the work that went around it. It was trying to get paid for them, trying to, chasing editors, chasing this person, chasing that person. And I have bills to pay, I have a house and cats to look after. So that's why and I just come out of hospital. And so I agreed to write all these books for Martin. And then but it's also, I've mentioned his name now, and now it's all sort of like rolling towards the sort of conclusion now. But working at the bookshop, so I managed to pay my bills and keep my hand in the freelance, but it's very tough now to earn a complete living out of writing like I used to when I was younger on newspapers, because the publications and paper, it's all changing into online, and it's all changing. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur with the print, I'm afraid, because the print, it's in inks in my blood. So I still like to write for Britain at War magazine. I do a book review for them every month, as you probably know, saw on my website. So I still keep my hand in, and they commission features from me, so I get to use all the research skills again. So yeah, that's how it works for me at the moment. So once I've completed my contract with Pen and Sword, then I'll be thinking and looking around and wondering what the next challenge will be, really. So yeah.
Well, you'll have to keep us updated on that journey, and
of course I will,
so that we can learn from your experiences.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting.
I'm not being negative, I'm just being realistic.
You're learning from your experiences,
I
and
am,
you know, and I'm learning from you. I'm learning from
Right.
all of the authors that I've had the opportunity to talk with this year, you know, as somebody who is still revising, you know, and hopefully will go into the experience a little better informed than people who haven't had the kind of access that I have. And then, of course, I'm recording these for any other writers to learn from too. So hopefully it helps them.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you sharing the
Yeah,
experience.
I do most of my own promotion and publicity, obviously, for it, because
That was
yeah,
going to be a question too. Yeah. So how do you do it?
and I enjoy it. I mean, a lot of it is because I enjoy it. I feel very natural talking, as you probably found out. I don't stop talking, but I really, you know, because there's so much to point out and share with what Mary and all those wonderful women of the ATA achieved. I really love the live, you know, lecture, the live talk. I love that because I love it. I mean, Zoom's great, but you know, it's not the same as it's seeing that crowd of faces and their reaction. And of course, from their reaction, you know if it's going well, or you know if someone wants you to tell another joke or be part of it. They feel more inclusive, I think, if you're in the room. And I find it very odd talking to, you know, the screen. I do find it a bit strange. So how do I do it? It's, you know, once you start, I can't stop. And when I do my talks, I have a really brilliant projector, and I have it's just run off of a memory stick. It's wonderful, and so I've got all my slides. So once I see the visuals, it then triggers all the memories of what I want to say. So I do the chronology of Mary's life basically when I do the talk about Mary. People love all that because they, you know, they associate with Oxfordshire, or they know someone who's there. And so I think the best thing is when people come up to me afterwards to buy a book, because I do actually earn some money when I sell my books, because I get them at a discount price, obviously. So that's lovely, because people come up to me to autograph it. And then some people say, oh, I met Mary once, and then so it's that lovely, that communication thing. And I think she'd be really pleased. And I always remember that it was quite heartening when she called me about a month before she died. I was about to go and do a talk, and it was a very hot day because it was July, I remember. It was early June, I think. And she came to, she called me just before I was about to go into this hall to do a talk. And she said, oh, are you going to come along at the weekend, because I'll sign some books? Well, of course, I said, yes, I'd like to. Anyway, it was she died, so I didn't get to go and see her for that lot, you know, for a proper sort of goodbye, because I was rushing, because I had to get in, there's people waiting, and I sort of ran on into the hall and said, oh, I'll tell you how it goes and everything. And so, but she did know that I was talking about the book all the time, although she said, I'm quite embarrassed. I don't know. She said, I don't know. So what did people say? And that year had been very busy for her, because she'd been she turned 100, and she was invited to number 10 Downing Street to meet Theresa May, the Prime Minister.
Wow.
Lots of photos of her. And she said to the RAF representative who was there, she said, I'm actually older than the RAF, which was formed in, I think it was formed in 1917, wasn't it? And Mary was born in 1917. So I'm actually older than the RAF, because that was celebrating its 100th anniversary as well. So she had a chat with Theresa May, and then 2 weeks later she was invited onto the red carpet, because have you seen John Dibb's film Spitfire? It's beautiful. It's just, the photography is superb. It's a stunning film. So of course he managed to find some veterans that were still with us and still able to talk about the war. So she appeared on that. Then she was at the premiere, and everyone wanted to meet her in London at the big cinema. And of course, it exhausted her every time she started to enjoy some of the fame, quite rightfully. She had to spend 2 or 3 weeks in bed to recover. And her niece told me this, because she had arthritis, and it was all. So that was something you'd never know. about Mary. So I tell that story too, because it makes her real to people.
Yeah.
That despite the kind of upright, steely, sort of outwardly reserved person with a really good sense of humour, quite wicked really sometimes, she was human, and she was frail, and she did get aches and pains like the rest of us, but never once did she complain or give any idea that she was in any sort of pain at all. So the talks kind of unfold, I mean, I've done some women's groups. So in England, you probably heard of, they have the Women's Institute, which sounds a bit sort of cheesy, but they all love it. They love hearing about it. And
how do these events find you? Or
because
how do you find them?
started finding them, I looked up a list of organisations here, history societies, all sorts of groups where people club together, mostly the history societies, and there are many in the southeast of England, because the British are a bit kind of keen, they're quite keen on history. I've found, it's something that, strangely enough, it's people kind of like hang on to it, because I think they like to have some sort of fabric to their lives, don't they? And so the history groups are really popular around here. And I started writing to the secretaries who book the speakers, and they said, yeah, we'll book you in for next March or next April. And it kind of grew from there. And then I've been doing them now for about 6 years. And
do you charge for these, or do you just sell your books there?
Is this for the record or off the record?
This is for the authors out there.
Yeah, well, I do. It kind of depends on the group, really. Some of them say, oh, we only pay up to £100.
Mm-hmm.
So usually I sort of like give myself 2 hours, because I'll talk and talk, me, and then they'll ask questions at the end. So it turns into more of a kind of quite a friendly thing. So I if it's a long way to drive, I have to charge expenses. That's just fair, because of car wear and tear, petrol, and so on. And so I always think about that if they say, oh, we haven't got any money, because if I've got to drive in the rain and the snow miles and miles, I have to kind of think to myself, can I actually go? And then I've got to be at work in the morning very early, bright and breezy.
Well, that's the thing, is like, if you're a working writer, that's your job, and like you said before, you have bills to pay, and so you're giving so much more than just a talk on the book. You're bringing this vast knowledge and understanding of the context in which Mary's history took place, and that's a lot of time in your life that you spent. And so I appreciate you taking the time with me, because
no, please, no, I love this, because this is going to go this is wonderful. Yes, I really appreciate your interest, and the fact that people in America can go to Barnes and Noble, and there's the book if they want to give me 10% of the royalties. 10%.
I know. Well, so, and that's important, people. 10% is, a traditionally published author is very common for what they're actually making. And so with that in mind, I highly encourage every reader to go and review your books, because at least the reviews can help expand the audience and perhaps the sales of the book, so that 10% can add up to some. Could you share with us what you struggle with as a writer?
It's always time, isn't it? At the moment for me, it's always that's always hoping that you're feel motivated at the time that you can have to get on with it. What I usually find is I can be, my big fear is I have a kind of I'm a bit of a procrastinator, and I'll think and think and think, and then before I know it, it's 4 o'clock, and then I'm thinking, this needs doing, that needs doing, and then all the time I am thinking. Sometimes it's really strange, because I'll wake up at 4 in the morning and then I'll start sort of tapping out the ideas and this sort of thing, especially if I've got a feature hanging over me for Britain at War. I'm thinking, I don't know anything. I had to write a feature about the Korean War and I knew nothing about it, but they do pay quite well, Britain at War. So I thought, well, I'll think about this. I'll think about this. And where do I start? And I'd started reading a few books, thinking this subject is blowing my mind. That happens sometimes. Is you think, where do I start? Where? But because I'd started reading about it and sort of tuning in, and I'd spoken to a veteran, and by that time I was getting some really good ideas about what it could be about. And then I woke up then, and I thought, oh, that would be the introduction. And then once I've written my introduction, it's really weird, because I think when I was a trainee reporter, it was always that was drummed into me. I want the introduction of the story to be no more than 25 words: who, why, what, where, when, and how. So if you're thinking you're your news reporter in Britain, that was the mantra, and probably America too. Who, why, what, where, when, and how. People's time is short. Put that all in the start of the story, no more than 25 words. That was your limit, 26 if you're lucky. And then the rest will flow. Then you've got da 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 da, and then he said, she said, and then the story unfolds. So that was my training to write to a formula. So even now I'm still thinking, I need to talk to the person. I can't just rely on Googling or books. I'd have to talk to a person who I can respond to with an idea that will go off in two or three different angles, and then you can kind of condense it all in my mind, because that information's come from a human voice. I really, really find it difficult if I was left to write a book or a feature which was just based on other people's texts. I'd find that so difficult, because it's like there's no life to it. There's no life, is there? It's all written before. It's all, I know to a certain extent we've got to use it. We've got to take it for granted. You've got to say, yes, this person's been interviewed and that's what they said to that other person. But unless I talk to someone, I find it really, really hard to get inspired to give it a flavor, my own, your own sort of little twists and flavor.
I can relate to that as someone who has not written very many articles, but who recently wrote a feature piece about one of our women pilots. And she has a biography, a memoir that just came out, and I read the memoir, but I had to talk to her. I mean, I could just regurgitate and quote her book, but I really wanted, you could read her book and get all that information. And so the same way and just talking with her for a few minutes was enough for me, because we've talked before and I know a lot about her. So yeah, I got that sense too. One of the things that I've heard you talking about there a little bit is something that I'm coming to terms with for myself, as someone whose work writing, for 30 years was sort of driven by deadlines and operational commitments. And I was somebody who was very good at meeting those. But I'm doing more creative work now, but even with a work where you're doing a feature on someone with known information that's out there, I am learning to trust my creative process. It doesn't always come when you tell it to. Sometimes it comes at 4 a.m. or, and so I was just kind of reflecting on my own process of learning to trust my creativity and know that it's going to come hopefully before the deadline. But also how to spark
memory,
that.
Liz, you've probably got a very good memory, haven't you, because of your career?
I have
your memory to me is so important, that I can, relay it, if you see what I mean. So I really did my best to remember those little phrases or something someone said, to just fire off these little sort of sparks. Does that sound crazy? But maybe
no, absolutely, yeah.
So it'll be fine. Just remember that, you know, if you're not under some sort of deadline, because when I you know, back to how did anyone find out about Mary's book, I hadn't told really that many people. I was just floating around this idea, and I think I'd written like a third of it before I got the call from Frontline. And I felt I was starting already to feel a bit rushed, you know, a bit annoyed. I was like, well, well, I don't know, because I was still floundering a little bit, thinking, is this lady going to talk to me a lot, or is that it now? So it was a really weird thing that I had to stick to it. Because when we first started, I remember Mary's very old, bless her. We first started the book. I used to type out the pages. I used to print out the page what I'd written, so she could see it, so she would trust. And then there was all this idea of listening and trusting, that she would trust I wasn't going to write some scandal about her. I think was possibly she worried about, because who am I? She didn't know me. I could have been some dreadful person trying to make loads of money out of her. And it took a while, I think, for her to trust me. So I thought, so to even make sure she knew what I was doing, I'll print out things as I go along. So each chapter I'd take to her and show her. But I think one of her criticisms was, in the early days, she goes, oh, no one wants to read all that history about aeroplanes. She said, no one wants to read about the history of the aeroplanes. Of course, because I'd laboriously gone through all this stuff about, oh, first there was the tiger moth, and how did that get created, and this sort of engine. She said, no one wants to read all that history. And I said, well, what would you like me to write in it? And she goes, oh, well, one of my friends, blah, 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 and this is, then I met Pauline Gower, and then that's how she started to tell me she didn't really want all the man stuff in it, I think, you know, about who created an aircraft and who was the first man to fly it, because I was trying to get to grips with this big unwieldy subject. So of course I had to kind of mention that men have been quite involved with it, but I think Mary wanted to jettison all that. She said it was boring, and I thought, Mary, I spent 3 weeks doing all this bit of research, getting it all down, and so she red line, bless her.
I think the way that you opened the book was excellent. I loved that you opened it with her first flight in a Spitfire. I loved that. And then I loved the way that you sprinkled in contextual history, especially the fact that she was neighbors with these people who were, you know, hosting all these important figures from World War II.
Yeah.
You know, and so it just, the way that you conveyed those things was not too heavy-handed. I like it.
Oh, great. Thank you. I stopped showing her what I was writing probably not long after I was contacted about it becoming a book, really, because I think by then she trusted me, but then there was still this disbelief in that there was actually a book being written. It was odd, actually, because I think because she became friends, I think because we were quite good sort of friends, she kind of didn't take it seriously. I always felt that she just thought it was something fun, and I was there to be a companion and to chat and to go to the pub, and then, you know, and then she wanted to know why I was interested in aircraft, so I'd tell her the story and everything, and then she wanted to talk more about her boutique and fashion, because Mary was a fashionista. She had such an amazing, you know, collection of jewelry, and she always looked so dapper with her scarves and her silk jackets. And so there were sometimes she didn't want to really talk about aviation, but I had to keep steering her back to it a little bit. So it was in a way, when I look back, I guess it was quite magical the way the whole process did pull together in the end. But there were times, obviously, when you know, I needed to go and see Molly Rose, because there were areas that I was never going to get anything out of Mary, because perhaps she didn't experience it. So it did. It grew, and then it reel it back in, grows, reel it back in, and then I think it was Ernest Hemingway, wasn't it, who said that writing was blood, sweat and tears.
Yeah,
I think it kind of is, really, isn't it? I've never heard of any writer that says, oh, it's really easy and I get up and I just write everything. And Graham Greene said 500 words a day, which I think is quite a good tip, actually, isn't it? Is that do you think that's reasonable, 500 words a day?
Listen, I think it depends on where you are with the story that you're writing.
Yeah.
And what else you have going on in your life. I think 500 words, I mean, I can get up and write 500 words. They might not show up in my book, but yeah, I think it's a good practice. I've had periods of time when I've tried to be consistent with that, and other periods of time when I'm not successful at doing that. How about you?
I think so. I'm thinking of the of some things I learned because I read drama and theatre studies at university, and we had to study Bertolt Brecht, and I always remember him saying or writing something which went along the lines of if you're going to tell a story or write a story, imagine a friend you're telling it to. Don't overanalyze, don't get terribly complicated, because that's very, when you've got piles of research in your head and you go, what's the first sentence? Oh my God. And you keep crossing it out and go, that word would be better. And then before I know it, when I'm thinking about my early introduction to something, I'm thinking, oh, don't use that word, another adjective, don't use too many adjectives, don't do this. And I'm thinking, no, just, and I think of that a lot. I think I'm going to tell Liz this story. And then we start, and then you start, and then it starts to unfold a little bit because you're relaxed. But if you try and think, oh, I'm standing in the Albert Hall and I've got to deliver this seismic lecture, and all these intellectuals are going to start throwing word games at me and it's going to get really heavy, I just keep that friendly thing in mind. And I think I'm standing on a street corner and I've bumped into somebody I know, and I'm going to tell them I've met this woman called Mary Ellis who flew 400 Spitfires in the Second World War. So I try and bear that in mind when I'm writing, to keep the reader in with you, keep them friendly and on the street corner, and then you go for a coffee and a chat, and it'll help it unfold before it gets too detailed and heavy. And the minute I get bored, I don't write anymore. That happens a fair bit. I think, oh, I'm getting bored now, and I start repeating things. And I think, oh, I've got bored. And I always know when that happens, and it's usually after about 1,000 words. I might suddenly think, ooh, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to research some photographs or something. I'm going to stop this bit because I'm getting a slightly bit bored myself now, and I'm going to think there's another one. No, there's something else that's going to inspire me, or I might think of what I'd like as a jacket design or something. So that's always interesting how, and if you are going to get published, Liz, and I know you're going to, try and get control of how the book is going to look. Because although we don't like this idea that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, working in a bookshop, oh boy, it does. If you've got a brilliant designer, you're into a winner, because people will pick it up. If it looks really dull, they go, oof.
This is a gorgeous cover.
Do you like that cover?
I do like it. I will publish traditionally through the children's and young adult publishing world here in the United States. And I have already in my mind drawn my book cover, but I will have no say in what my book cover, I mean, not no say, but I will have very little influence over my book cover. And I know that. And so I just have to trust and make good decisions about my agent and my publisher, and hope that the right one finds me and that they match me well.
Yeah. So you specialize in books for young people, do you?
Children and young adults. Yeah, I'm writing.
Do you have children?
I have 3. I have one who is 29, one who is 18, and one who is 9.
Oh, okay, right, okay. So you should really know the market then. That's brilliant. Yeah.
And they're all readers. I breed readers. So yeah.
Really? Wow. And is there quite a gap in the market in America for books for young people about aircraft and aviation? Because I guess I'm going to think about
nothing. There's
Really?
nothing. Yeah, so, I mean, okay, so there's not nothing. There are about 150 books
Classics.
no, just 150 in general, not
Right.
all classics, on my website, the Aviatrix Book Review website, for
Yeah.
young readers of a variety from, like, you know, early readers up to young adult. Everything from self-published picture books that vary in quality to Elizabeth Wean's best-selling Codename Verity. You know, I have all of those are on there. So, you know, a contemporary realistic fiction featuring a girl who learns how to fly. There is one.
Wow. I think over here, you're right about UK as well for young people. Although I think mostly we still sell the boys' own stuff, Biggles, Roald Dahl, Going Solo. So for the girls, usually it's 12-year-old girls who see the cover of Mary's book and they go, who's that? Who's that? And then their mother or their father says, oh, yes, who is that? And then I jump in, they go, oh, well, you should read this, because not only should you read it and buy it, because it's about a real live lady who only died recently and this or that. So I try to introduce them to a grown-ups book, but I don't think there's anything I can think of in our shop about a female pilot aimed at teenagers or younger audience. I don't think. No, you're right.
Well,
you're so right.
well, if there aren't, then you need to get Elizabeth Wean's books in there for sure. She has books for dyslexic and reluctant readers that feature a variety of she's all in World War II. Basically, most of her books are World War II women who flew for their countries.
Wow.
So
okay,
definitely get her books in there.
And
but
then
yeah,
yours. So
yeah, and mine will be the contemporary twist.
Come on. Yeah.
Before we wrap up this writing portion, what advice do you have for other writers who are considering preserving history or the story of a particular person through their writing?
Don't lose heart. And I say that because I realize that a lot of our history has been written by men through the ages. That's why it's called his story, isn't it? Whereas Mary is very much her story. So don't lose heart. Keep reading, researching, and then speak to, if you can, if you're not writing about Elizabethan or Tudor times or something, speak to as many real humans that you can. Don't just rely on loads of texts to get you through, because you'll lose interest and you'll get bored because there's all a load of jumble of words. You need to live the experience as much as you can and know the person as much as you can to feel inspired to recreate what they've told you. And then obviously you fill in the cake with the actual facts and the history, but choose the most interesting and choose the most poignant and sparky and unusual areas of that history, if you can, of people doing remarkable things under remarkable strain or possibly remarkable times, and always try and find that there's some humor somewhere, somehow, that kind of gets the human condition through whatever they might be facing. So I think that's probably my advice, but try not to give up, because there are times you're with the subject too much and you don't want to get jaded, but as I explained earlier, the minute you feel that starting to sink in, stop writing and go and do something else, really, because then otherwise the boredom will come through and you'll have to rewrite it anyway. So it's just to know the warning sign. And even that feeling, I don't want to do much today, but I'll read about it or something. I don't want to write too much, I'll read about it instead. I think that's a perfect kind of excuse, if you like, for not sitting at the keyboard, because you're still filling your brain with something that will then come out once you start back onto it again. And I try to do 500 words a day, but that can be quite difficult. But I still try to keep something writing something going on. If I wake up in the morning or something, I try to sort of, get the idea out while it's there, because that feeling of, oh, I'm just going to go to sleep again. In the morning, you've just forgotten, haven't you? It's like a dream. You go, I must write that down, and then you never do. And then you write, oh, what was that about? I remember thinking I must remember it, and then you don't. So I think that's the thing, is you just have to bite the bullet and keep going, and try not to keep counting the words, because that's another sign that you're rushing, you're trying to get to the end. So if you can get really involved in what you're writing, it should just absorb you. And that lovely feeling when you start at 1 o'clock and then you look at the clock, like being with a good person, and then you notice it's actually 4 o'clock. You haven't noticed that time has fled. Like now, Liz, as we've been chatting, I've just looked at the time. Oops.
I know.
So it's
wonderful.
that feeling. You kind of know it's right, don't you? When to stop and when to start. So yeah. So don't get disheartened, and remember there's always other views out there, not just like the sort of the concrete male. It's military history. There are now, fortunately, more views floating around, and women do have a voice, even though it's still, we've got to find them and write about them.
Wonderful advice. Thank you. Well, Melody, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you.